In this video, I just want to create a reference all about the item list. This is kind of a home base for everything you do in Moto. You can see over here, obviously, item list, but there's a couple of things that you might not be familiar with. You can filter items, and when you open this up, you can actually take a look at the default, which is backdrops, cameras, dynamics, forces, and so on. Everything you do in Moto will obviously show up in the item list. However, there's certain times where you may want to filter down just to the meshes or just to your cameras, depending on how big your scene is. So just be aware that you can do that. So sometimes you don't have to have a big, gigantic item list. You can filter them out. You can add items. Okay, and this is for everything in your scene. So fall offs to forces to different lights to locators and so on. So we're going to use these throughout the course. We can have backdrop items and other types of things that you might just want to put into the scene. All right. And finally, you've got this little search filter up here. So when you click that, you can go ahead and just search out camera, and it filters down just to that. So if you know it's in the scene, but you can't find it somewhere, that's actually a really good way to take a look for something in your item list. Talking about these columns quickly, I know earlier in our quick start tutorial, we talked about this eyeball icon, and this just makes things visible or not visible, very simply. This guy right here is actually our item mode, and this tells us what mode we're working in. So if we select the ship, you'll see that we've got sort of this little crosshair. Now if I go to polygon mode, this actually changes to component mode. Okay, so, and you can actually see right there, item mode and component mode. And not much to really worry about with that. It's just it signifies which mode you're in as you're working. This next one actually is a little bit trickier. And this one helps us go from local to world or vice versa. And what that means is that your center becomes the origin. So for example, if I take this ship and I move it up over here, and maybe I select a few polygons and I hit this button right here, that selected becomes now my origin. Okay, I don't really end up doing that too often. It's actually there to sometimes make modeling a little bit more helpful. You may have things in place somewhere, and it can be very hard to manipulate or move those parts or adjust something. I've had like little rods on an angle, and it's been very hard to actually select and move them. By going to a local like that, it allows me to select and move easily and then put that item back in place. Okay, so that's what it is. I don't really know too many people that know about that. Everybody I talk to, oh, I never touched that. All right, the other thing in here, obviously, is our meshes. So a blue square represents a mesh. You can click on it, hold your mouse and wait, and rename. You can right click, and when you right click, you can rename. You can edit the color of it. You can export that layer if you want. You have different presets, okay, different references. And so as we need these, we will go ahead and use them. You can also create groups. So for instance, if I bring my screen back out and I just created a bunch of other things here, and suddenly I think, hey, you know what? I want to put all these in one group. Select the first one, hold the shift key, select the last one, press Control G on your keyboard. You've now just grouped all those items together, and we can call this ship stuff. You can open it up by hitting the little triangle, and you'll see that there's all the items. When you see a mesh layer that's ghosted like this, that actually means that you have a mesh layer, but, well, nothing in it. That's why it's ghosted. If you don't need it, you can then right click on it and delete. By the same token, when you right click on something, down at the bottom, you can actually lock a layer as well. And when you do that, nothing can happen to it. So certain times you may want to lock things and avoid any missteps along the way. What I like to do in here in this item list is really keep it organized. So as I add multiple cameras for different views, multiple lights, any type of solvers and things like that, I actually like to group them. And doing this like that is actually a really good way to work. And certainly you come down, you can edit the color as well. That also helps you just stay organized. And you'll see a lot of demo scenes. Sometimes they'll do that as well. When you add different items, they come in with different icons as well. So we could put in like a particle modifier. So here's like a little gear in there. Now, the order of things in here doesn't matter unless you're doing some kind of hierarchy. And what I mean by that is, let me delete this guy here. What I mean by that is, right now I can have this ship stuff, I can have that whole group underneath just by clicking and dragging like that. Doesn't make any difference to the scene. I could take the camera, put it on top of the light. Doesn't make any difference. Okay, so I'd mentioned earlier this is kind of like Photoshop, understanding these layers, but in this case, that order doesn't matter unless you're doing something like this. We've got a cube here. Got this. This is where select through comes in handy. And I can move that up. Select this, move that up. Okay, so I want to take the torus and I want it to move with the cube. So I'm going to select the torus, click and drag, and drop it on top of the cube. When I do that, you can see that it's indented. And that means when I select the cube and move it, the torus moves with. I just set a parent. Okay, so that's really the only time you're going to need to worry about the order of things right here. For the basics. Later on, when you get into more intricate things in solvers and particles, the order is important. But for our simple mesh items, unless you're doing any kind of parenting, you can have those groups above or below cameras and lights, and it doesn't matter. Finally, in working with this, when you select any of these items, the properties for that item show up below. And often you're going to need to go into these tabs on the right. So I can select my torus, go down to position, rotation, and scale. Here's the mesh. Here's display. Here's curves, surface, and so on. So all the necessaries for each of these items is very easy to get to. Just select it, and you'll find all the properties below. Okay, so let's turn this off. Click. Just a quick overview on the item list. It's a good reference for you if you need. Let's move on. I want to talk more about shading and materials.